Friends, wherever you are tonight, find your comfortable space. Maybe dim that bright lamp beside you. We are stepping into shadows now. If this kind of journey matters to you, tap like so others might find it. If you want more walks through history, subscribe, only if it feels true. Whisper where you are, listening coast, country, city, night, or dawn. Your presence makes the past breathe now. Settle your shoulders, let your breath slow. We are going back to 1914 when the world held its breath. Summer 1914 hung heavy over Europe like the last golden hour before a thunderstorm. Vienna cafes buzzed with talk of art and anarchism, the air thick with coffee steam and cigarette smoke. Parisians strolled along the Seine laughing at street performers. London clerks bought peppermints from glass jars, the sharp, sweet scent cutting through coal dust everywhere, the smell of baking bread from corner bakeries mixed with horse manure from the streets beneath this ordinary life. Emperors traced borders on maps with fountain pens that scratched like knives on parchment. While in Sarajevo, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip coughed into his hand, tuberculosis gnawing his lungs as he waited on a sun-warm street corner, his pocket heavy with a pistol and generations of Balkan anger. When the Archduke's car took that wrong turn onto Franz Josef Street, Princip stepped forward, his worn shoes crunching gravel, 2 shots cracked sharp as snapping twigs, not thunderous but final. Blood bloomed on Franz Ferdinand's stiff collar like some terrible flower. His last words whispered to his collapsing wife Sophie were soft as a lullaby. Sofrel, Sofrel. As if calling her home from market, the driver panicked, lurching the car forward over rain-puddled cobblestones. No one knew yet. The world had just pivoted on that ordinary corner. Telegrams began humming through midnight offices where men in green eye shades bent over words like ultimatum and mobilization, their fingers stained purple from the ink.
Mobilization posters appeared overnight like mushrooms after rain, cheap paper slapped onto brick walls beside butcher shops smelling of blood and sawdust. Your king and country need you. Farmhands in Kent dropped hay forks staring at the smudged ink, their hands still gritty with soil. German boys barely shaving lied about their age, puffing out thin chests while mothers hid trembling hands in apron pockets. Train stations became cathedrals of dread. Steam hissed like angry cats as locomotives coughed cinders onto platforms, thick with coal smoke and sweat. In those crowded stations, French mothers pressed lavender sachets into sons' tunics. For your dreams, mon coeur, their fingers lingering on cheeks where downy hair still grew. Fathers gripped shoulders too tight, throats working soundlessly. Brothers punched arms, laughing too loud. Brass bands played patriotic tunes, trumpets shrill against swallowed sobs. Young men leaned from carriage windows, faces flushed with false courage, shouting home by Christmas, the lie tasting like tin on their tongues. Outside Berlin, the Kaiser strutted before mirrors, adjusting his eagle-crested helmet. You will be home before leaves fall, he promised, as the first autumn wind stirred linden trees outside. Then came Belgium, not around but through. Farmer Emile van de Velde guided his plow horse through dawn mist outside Liège, the air sweet with turned earth, then a low rumble, not thunder, something deeper. Gray shapes emerged, endless columns, boots crunching his barley shoots. A lieutenant barked, guttural German. The horse reared, whinnying. Shots rang out. Warm blood soaked Emile's trousers as he knelt in mud, cradling the animal's head, its eye reflecting the gray, indifferent sky. In Louvain, librarian Henriette Claus smelled smoke while shelving Aquinas manuscripts. Flames licked oak beams of the 14th century library. Schrecklichkeit. A soldier screamed, throwing lanterns at velvet drapes.
French soldiers marched to war in uniforms brighter than poppies, scarlet trousers, sky blue coats like Napoleonic paintings against machine guns that stuttered death in mechanical bursts. Men fell in neat rows like wheat stalks cut by scythes, their blood soaking into chalky soil, creating mud the color of rusted iron and regret. Generals called it Elan Vital, spirit soldiers called it the slaughterhouse. By dusk, the fields lay silent except for the moaning that rose like some terrible choir. The crows had not yet come, only the wounded cried in the gathering twilight, a sound to haunt survivors for 50 years. They dug first shallow scrapes, then deeper, shovels biting clay and rock blisters rising, bursting on palms unaccustomed to labor. Trenches became their world, a dripping labyrinth of mud, stretching from Swiss mountains to North Sea. Rain turned earth to thick soup. Men stood hours in water, numbing feet to stumps. The smell lived. Cordite latrines, rotting sandbags, unwashed bodies beneath it all. The sweet, cloying stench of death drifting across no man's land on night winds. Soldiers learned to distinguish shell types by sound. The distant church bell of mortars, the tearing canvas of rifles, the approaching train shriek that meant run or pray. No man's land existed between hatreds, a scar earth cratered like the moon, barbed wire tangling like devilish vines, littered with war debris, broken rifles, dented helmets, shreds of uniform, shapes that were once men frozen mid-crawl, sinking into mud. Patrols crept out at night, feeling through darkness every shadow an enemy, every sound a threat. Flares would suddenly burst green light, freezing men like insects in amber. Then machine guns rattled and screaming began. Sometimes you heard just one cry, "Mama," echoing in the sudden silence after the guns stopped. Rats arrived, not city vermin, but monstrous beasts fed well. Their eyes glowed red in dugout candlelight. Men woke to gnawing on boot leather, or worse, the sound of them feasting out there, the squeaks, rustles, constant companions of sleepless nights. Winter 1914 brought new hell, frostbite. Blackened toes in sodden boots, men huddled sharing body heat like puppies. The cold seeped into bones, became a living thing. On Christmas Eve, German and British soldiers began singing, Silent Night, Holy Night, voices drifting across frozen waste, then calls, Frohe Weihnachten, Fritz, Merry Christmas, Tommy. Men climbed from trenches, met in craters, shared cigarettes, chocolate, showed photos of sweethearts, babies. For hours, humanity flickered, then officers ordered them back. The shooting resumed. April 1915. Ypres, a strange yellow-green. Clouds, silent, ominous, drifted toward French lines. Men stared curious, then choking burning eyes, seizing lungs, gas, chlorine. It turned air to poison. Soldiers fumbled with urine-soaked rags, the only defense survivors breathed forever afterward. Like broken bellows, eyes permanently red-rimmed. War shed its last pretense of chivalry. It was now chemical, industrial, inhuman. The ground itself wept poison. For decades afterward, farmers still find canisters oozing death. Gallipoli dawn, April 25, 1915. Aegean Sea, impossibly blue, boats packed with young Australians, New Zealanders, hearts pounding against ribs, ramps dropped. Turkish machine guns hidden in cliffs roared. Water churned crimson. Boys stumbled ashore. Packs dragging fell like cut wheat. Sun beat down. Indifferent sea lapped red foam against sand. Not a beach, a butcher's slab. By noon, the shallows were clotted with bodies. The lucky ones drowned quickly. Women stepped into empty spaces. Munitions factories hummed with their labor, handling TNT that turned skin yellow. Canary girls, they were called, coughing in chemical air. hair brittle from toxins. They drove trams, plowed fields, managed shops, wrote letters filled with lies about home, never mentioning hunger, gnawing bellies, the hollow fear at 3 a.m., the ache of empty beds. They tasted independence, felt camaraderie, knew they could never return to parlors and petticoats. Verdun, February 1916. The barrage began at dawn, a 9-hour storm of steel. Men in underground forts felt concussions in their teeth. When it lifted, the landscape was moonscape. Trees splintered, hills leveled earth, a pock-marked swamp of craters. French soldiers clung to ruins of forts, Douaumont and Vougeot, fighting over cellars flooded with bloody water. The generals promised bleed. France. White became reality. Rain turned craters to drowning pools. Men died swallowing mud, their bodies becoming part of the earth they fought for. The Somme. July 1st, 1916. Whistles blew, 7:30 a.m. British soldiers climbed ladders, walked toward German lines, believing bombardment destroyed everything. Machine guns opened fire. Men fell in orderly rows like wheat before scythes. By day's end, 60,000 casualties. Newfoundland Regiment vanished in 30 minutes. PALS battalions from same streets, factories, football teams erased. Sun shone bright on fields carpeted khaki. Crimson, the bloodiest day in British history, and the battle had barely begun. Tanks lurched forward at flares. Courcelette, September 15. Great iron beasts, crews baked inside, deafened by engines, choking petrol fumes. They moved like blind turtles, bogging in mud, becoming artillery targets. Men died, roasted alive in metal coffins, or drowned in mud seeping through vision slits. A glimpse of future war, clanking, impersonal, terrifying. Soldiers watched these monsters with equal parts hope and horror.
Air war remained strangely chivalrous. Young men in leather helmets, goggles, flew flimsy wood canvas biplanes. Dogfights were swirling dances, death above the mud. The Red Baron became legend, but most fell anonymously in flames. No parachutes issued. If plane burned, you jumped, chose burning or falling 1,000 feet. Many chose the fall. Ground crews found them embedded in earth like gruesome seedlings. War at sea meant silent dread. U-boats stalked shipping lanes like wolves. May 7th, 1915, Lusitania torpedoed, sank 18 minutes. Children's lifebelts bobbed among wreckage. Little shoes washed ashore. Ireland. America stirred but waited 2 more years before joining the dance of death. The sea took sailors without graves, only cold salt and silence. Air war remained strangely chivalrous young men in leather helmets. Goggles flew flimsy wood canvas biplanes. Dogfights were swirling dances, death above the mud. The Red Baron became legend, but most fell anonymously in flames. No parachutes issued. If plane burned, you jumped, chose burning or falling. 1,000 feet, many chose the fall. Ground crews found them embedded in earth like gruesome seedlings. War at sea meant silent dread. U-boats stalked shipping lanes like wolves. May 7th, 1915, Lusitania torpedoed. Sank 18 minutes, children's lifebelts bobbed among wreckage. Little shoes washed ashore. Ireland. America stirred, but waited 2 more years before joining the dance of death. The sea took sailors without graves, only cold, salt, and silence. Eastern Front, vast frozen hell. Russian armies lurched forward. Endless human waves, but poorly supplied. Men froze in summer uniforms at Tannenberg. 1914. Germans encircled, destroyed entire army. Corpses piled like cordwood in Masurian lakes. A catastrophe foreshadowing collapse.
The snow never seemed to melt, only absorbed more blood. Russia crumbled. Tsar Nicholas clung to power, while soldiers at front had no rifles, told pick them up from dead Petrograd. Bread lines became riots. Revolution simmered, boiled. February 1917, Tsar abdicated. Provisional government kept Russia dying for lost cause. Exhaustion became revolution. Lenin arrived April. Sealed train from Switzerland. German plot to spread chaos. His message simple: peace, land, bread. Soldiers listened, dropped rifles, walked home. Front collapsed. October Revolution. Bolsheviks seized power. Russia exited war, but cost was brutal. Civil war. Brother killing brother for 5 bitter years. 1917, despair. French army mutinied after disastrous Nivelle offensive. Men refused attack. We hold line, they said, but not go slaughter again. Not cowardice. Humanity pushed beyond endurance. Generals listened barely. Few executions improved conditions, but spirit was broken. Eyes held hollow. Look of trapped animals.
Passchendaele, 3rd Ypres summer, 1917. Rain. Relentless torrential turned battlefield. Swamp men drowned. Shell holes wounded sank. Mud disappeared. Duckboards became death traps. Tanks bogged like beached whales. Attack became battle against elements. Elements won. When Canadians took ruined village, November, it was Pyrrhic victory. Mud claimed more lives than bullets. Desert war. Ancient landscapes. Lawrence Arabia flowed. White robes led Bedouin revolt. Camels carried machine guns across sands where empires rose, fell, millennia. Jerusalem fell British. December 1917. Allenby walked humbly through Jaffa Gate. But lines drawn sand then haunt. Middle East still today. The past, never buried there, only waits. America arrived. Doughboys, fresh-faced, poured off ships. 1918 handing chocolate cigarettes to hollow-eyed veterans. Their presence tangible hope at Belleau Wood. Marines charged. Machine guns suffered terribly but held, learned war fast. The tide turned with their young blood. German Spring Offensive, 1918 last. Desperate gamble, stormtroopers with flamethrowers broke trenches. Reached Marne again. Paris seemed close, but troops exhausted. Supplies low. Allies counterattacked with tanks. Fresh Americans pushed back. The end neared with every retreating step. Spanish flu struck autumn 1918. Cruel twist preyed. Young, healthy soldiers packed troop ships. Barracks became death traps. Men survived years. War coughed blood died. Fever hospital tents. Pandemic followed armies home, killed more than war itself in some places. Grief compounded. Armistice. November 11, 1918, 11 a.m. Guns stopped. Sudden silence after years' thunder. Men stood trenches, disbelieving. Some laughed, some wept, some sat. Mud stunned. Birdsong filled air. Forgotten sound unbearably beautiful. The quiet louder than any barrage. Coming home, villages missing half. Young men, sweethearts married. Others, children stared uncomprehending at gaunt strangers. Fathers, jobs vanished. Minds shattered. World moved on. Survivors carried trenches inside them, a weight never unshouldered. How to speak of unspeakable things. Versailles, 1919. Victor's carved world. Old men's stuffy rooms drew lines, maps creating countries like Iraq, Syria. No thought, people there. Germany blamed forced pay. Reparations that crippled economy. Humiliation piled deep. Seeds, future conflict sown. One diplomat called it peace to end all peace, knowing better. Human cost, 10 million dead, 20 million wounded, countless millions grieving. Disfigured men, ghouls, casses, without faces, hidden behind screens. Parks learning eat through tubes, wearing tin masks. Painted human, cruel mockery of life lost, shell shock, now PTSD, then weakness, hysteria. Men trembled, jumped, noises, stared, distance, some blinded, mute, no physical cause, treated electric shocks, hypnosis, ridicule, suffering, silent epidemic. Families hid them, shame. World changed, empires fallen, women voted, tasted independence wouldn't return. Society shifted axis, lost generation wandered, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, remark, writing stripped bare, cynical seeking truth, sensation, alcohol, fast living. Memorials rose, cenotaphs, village squares, vast cemeteries, Tyne cot, Menin gate, names missing, endless tomb, unknown soldier, poppy wreath, last post rituals born for bereaved. Cold comfort stone silent hole remained, colonial troops returned, ingratitude, Senegalese tirailleurs, Indian sepoys faced racism, contempt, empires bled for sacrifice. Forgotten dignity denied, hypocrisy fueled independence movements reshaped world. Germany writhed 20s, hyperinflation, money worthless, wheelbarrows, cash, bread loaf, middle class ruined, desperation grew, angry voices promised scapegoats return glory, seeds Nazism found soil. Technology harvested machine guns, artillery tanks, poison gas aircraft. Knowledge remained. Next war would build this foundation. War end wars, perfected destruction, medicine advanced brutally, plastic surgery, blood transfusion, psychiatry began, understand trauma, cost, suffering. Children grew wars, shadow fathers, ghosts absent, dead broken mothers, worn thin played, scarred streets collected shell casings, toys wore gas masks, school drills absorbed grief, anger, silence, generation-shaped fear. Old soldiers met pubs, not glory stories. Silence grunts, name mentioned softly. Old Bill copped Passchendaele. Didn't he? Hand trembled lifting pint. Sudden noise made shoulders tense. Eyes dart language understood only there. We sit now, warm rooms, screens, comforts unimagined. 1914, but shadow, long, cold touches, everything. Concept, total war, Middle East, borders drawn, Paris, international organizations, flawed attempts, suspicion, nationalism, blind obedience, short victorious war lie, literature, art, collective unconscious, disillusionment, humanity's capacity savagery. 20th century forged Somme, mud, Verdun, hell. The unhealed scars. Survivors returned, but home was a foreign country. Limbs gone, lungs rasping from gas, faces rebuilt by surgeons into stiff approximations of humanity. The girls' cassettes hid behind screens, their tin masks painted with grotesque smiles. The lucky ones wore physical wounds, others carried invisible rot. Flinching at slamming doors, waking screaming into the silence of peacetime nights. Doctors called it neurasthenia, hysteria, weakness. Men drowned the tremors in cheap gin or sat vacant in garden sheds, unable to speak of the mud that still sucked at their dreams. A world remade, badly. Versailles' gilded halls echoed with old men's pens scratching borders onto maps of lands they'd never seen. Iraq, Syria, Yugoslavia, nations conjured from imperial carcasses, ignoring ancient rivers of tribe and faith. Germany, shackled by guilt and debt, bled gold into reparations until wheelbarrows of marks bought a loaf of bread. Humiliation curdled into resentment.
fertile ground for sharp, angry voices promising vengeance and a return to stolen pride. The seeds of the next storm were sown in the ink of that punitive peace. The Lost Generation. Adrift, young men who survived felt ancient, ghosts among the living. They wandered Parisian cafes or Midwestern towns, their laughter edged with cynicism. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Remarque, they wrote stripped bare, rejecting the hollow platitudes of glory. They chased sensation in fast cars, jazz clubs, and the bottom of bottles, searching for meaning in a world where old gods, duty, honor, empire, lay shattered in the Somme mud. They were survivors, but felt irrevocably lost. Silent stones and unanswered grief. White cemeteries bloomed across France and Flanders, endless rows of identical headstones stark against green fields. The men in gates swallowed names by the tens of thousands, known unto God. Villages erected cenotaphs carved with names of boys who never grew old. Every November, poppies bloomed scarlet, a fragile beauty born of blood-soaked earth. The last post echoed at Ypres, a ritual born of unbearable grief, yet the silence beneath the stone remained absolute, a vast, cold hole where futures should have been. Broken promises, rising fury. Colonial troops who fought loyally for empires returned to contempt. Senegalese tirailleurs faced brutal discrimination in French streets. Indian sepoys were denied promised pensions and respect. The hypocrisy bled deep. Their blood had bought victory for rulers who offered only broken pledges. This bitter harvest of ingratitude fed nascent independence movements, igniting fires across Africa and Asia that would reshape the globe. The war didn't end empires. It started their long, bloody unraveling. War's gruesome harvest. The technology birthed in desperation, the whine of aircraft engines, the clank of tanks, the hiss of gas, became the grim inheritance of the future. Medicine leapt forward, driven by mangled bodies. Blood transfusions saved lives, plastic surgery rebuilt faces, psychiatry tentatively probed shattered minds. But the knowledge was double-edged. The next war wouldn't start with pistol shots in Sarajevo. It would open with bombers darkening the sky, perfected machines of annihilation built upon the brutal lessons of Flanders Field. Children of the Shadow. A generation grew beneath the war's long pall. Fathers were ghosts, absent, dead, or broken husks haunting attics. Mothers were worn thin by grief and work. Children played in streets still scarred by shrapnel, collected spent brass casings for toys, practiced gas mask drills at school. They absorbed the unspoken sorrow, the brittle tension, the weary cynicism. Their games sometimes mimicked the trenches. Their nightmares were populated by monsters their parents had known too well. They were shaped by the silence. The bitter truth of never again. The phrase, "the war to end all wars," curdled into the bitterest of jokes. The treaties fostered resentment. The League of Nations proved toothless. The arms merchants merely retooled. The idealism of 1914 was buried deeper than any soldier in no man's land. The war hadn't ended conflict. It had industrialized it, perfected its cruelty, and demonstrated humanity's terrifying capacity for organized savagery on an unprecedented scale. Never again, became a whispered hope against the rising drumbeat of new ideologies promising conflict. The weight of witness. In smoky pubs decades later, old soldiers gathered. They rarely spoke of glory. A name mentioned softly. Old Bill copped it at Passchendaele, didn't he? A hand trembling, slightly lifting a pint glass, eyes momentarily darting at a sudden backfire in the street. A shared silence, heavy with unspoken horrors, was their true language. They carried the trenches within them, a landscape of mud and wire and rotting sandbags permanently etched into their souls, a weight they could never truly unshoulder for the civilians who could never comprehend. The long, cold shadow. We inhabit the world they bled into being. The brittle borders drawn at Versailles crack and bleed still. The disillusionment, the shattered faith in progress, the gnawing suspicion of authority, the specter of total war. These are the legacies of 1914-1918. The poppies still bloom, the last post still sounds, but the true monument is the long, cold shadow stretching across a century. A constant, chilling reminder that the peace bought with 10 million lives was fragile, and the lessons learned in the mud were too easily, catastrophically, forgotten. The past doesn't rest, it echoes. The haunting silence. The silence after the guns wasn't peace, merely an absence of artillery. It settled like dust in attics where uniforms hung untouched, in village halls missing half their choir, in the hollow eyes of men who stared through loved ones at horrors replaying on the ceiling. This silence was thick with unasked questions, unshared grief, the deafening roar of everything that couldn't be said. Families tiptoed around broken fathers, wives learned the language of flinches and nightmares, children absorbed the pervasive dread like damp rising from cellar walls. Monuments of stone. Cracks beneath. The grand memorials rose, vast arches, weeping angels, eternal flames, imposing testaments carved in cold marble. Yet, for many grieving mothers, these were distant, official things. Their true monuments were the empty chair at Sunday dinner, the unopened trunk of letters from the front, the photograph fading on the mantelpiece of a boy forever young. The state offered stone, the heart demanded flesh and blood that would never return. The chasm between public commemoration and private desolation grew wider with each passing year. The poisoned well. Versailles wasn't just a treaty, it poisoned the well of European stability. Germany's humiliation festered, a wound exploited by demagogues whispering of betrayal and stolen victory. Hyperinflation turned savings to worthless paper, fueling desperation. In beer halls and back alleys, new myths were forged. The stab in the back legend, the need for racial purity, the call for Lebensraum. The fragile Weimar Republic gasped for air, while the embers of resentment glowed ever hotter, waiting for the right bellows.
the laboratory of brutality. The trenches had been a gruesome laboratory. Tactics of mass assault, industrial killing, psychological warfare, and dehumanization were refined. The lessons weren't lost on ambitious tyrants. Total war, the blurring of soldier and civilian, the power of propaganda, these became blueprints. The Somme and Verdun weren't endpoints, they were prototypes. The men who survived the mud saw, with chilling clarity, how easily it could all happen again, only faster, harder, from the sky. Art's shattered mirror. Art fractured. Cubism mirrored the shattered landscapes. Data screamed absurdity at the carnage. Surrealism plumbed the depths of nightmare minds. Painters like Otto Dix and George Gross depicted mutilated veterans and bloated profiteers with savage, unflinching strokes. Music grew dissonant, jagged. Schoenberg's atonality echoing the loss of harmonic certainty. Literature shed Victorian plumage, embracing stark realism, stream of consciousness, and the hollowed-out language of the traumatized. The world could never be rendered beautifully innocent again. The unquiet graves. The earth itself remained a reluctant tomb. Farmers plowing fields near Ypres or Verdun still turned up rusted bayonets, skull fragments, unexploded shells oozing mustard gas. Unexploded ordnance became a deadly harvest, claiming limbs and lives decades later. The Iron Harvest was a grim annual reminder that the war wasn't truly buried. The ground bled metal and bone, a physical manifestation of history refusing to stay neatly in the past. The betrayal of peace, the League of Nations, conceived in Wilsonian idealism, proved tragically frail. Crippled by the absence of key powers, the U.S. never joined, Germany and Russia initially excluded, and lacking teeth to enforce its mandates, it watched helplessly as Japan invaded Manchuria, Italy swallowed Abyssinia, and Germany rearmed. The war to end war had birthed an institution too weak to prevent the next one. The idealism of 1919 curdled into the cynical realpolitik of the 1930s. The inherited fear. Children born after the armistice grew up under its long shadow. They played amidst economic instability, heard whispered arguments about reparations and fascists, saw the haunted looks, the trembling hands. Their bedtime stories weren't fairy tales, but fragmented, terrifying glimpses of gas and mud. This generation, inheriting a world fundamentally broken by a conflict they didn't fight, carried a baseline anxiety, a distrust of authority, and a visceral understanding that civilization was a thin veneer. They were primed for another storm. Echoes in the East. While Versailles reshaped Western Europe, the Ottoman collapse ignited a different powder keg. Sykes-Picot's arbitrary lines carved up the Middle East, ignoring tribal loyalties and ancient sectarian divides. British and French mandates fostered resentment. The promise of Arab self-determination made by Lawrence evaporated. This colonial imposition sowed seeds of instability, conflict, and anti-Western fury that would erupt violently throughout the 20th century and beyond, a direct legacy of great power diplomacy drawn over blood-soaked sand. The ghosts in the machine. Technology, accelerated by war, marched relentlessly forward. Aviation leaped from flimsy biplanes to the cusp of monoplane fighters and bombers. Tanks evolved from lumbering beasts into faster, deadlier weapons. Radio communication transformed command and control. Chemistry, honed for poison gas, found peacetime applications. But the knowledge of destruction remained. The very tools of progress carried the ghostly imprint of the trenches, forever tainted by their origin in industrialized slaughter. The long road to understanding trauma. Shell shock, slowly, painfully, evolved into a medical concept beyond cowardice or hysteria. Pioneering psychiatrists grappled with the profound psychological wounds. Treatments remained crude: electric shocks, isolation, harsh discipline. But the acknowledgement that the mind could be shattered like a limb began. This painful, often cruel journey laid the groundwork, however imperfectly, for modern understandings of PTSD, a recognition that the deepest wounds are often invisible. The fading witness. By the 1930s, the survivors were aging. The young lions of 1914 were now middle-aged men, their bodies often broken, their memories sharp yet sometimes terrifyingly vivid. As their numbers dwindled, so did the living connection to the raw experience. Commemoration risked becoming ritualized, sanitized. The visceral truth, the smell of gangrene, the taste of fear, the sound of a man drowning in mud, threatened to fade, leaving only the polished monuments and the simplified narratives of textbooks. The gathering storm clouds. The fragile peace buckled under the weight of the unresolved past. Economic collapse in 1929 shattered any stability gained. Fascism and Nazism offered seductive, violent solutions, wrapped in the rhetoric of national rebirth and scapegoating. Appeasement became the desperate strategy of leaders terrified of repeating 1914's slide into catastrophe, yet tragically enabling an even greater evil. The generation that survived the trenches watched with mounting horror as their sons were marched towards new mechanized killing fields. The lessons hadn't been learned. They'd been weaponized. The Unbroken Cycle, September 1st, 1939. German tanks rolled into Poland. Stuka dive bombers screamed. The long, cold shadow had finally swallowed the sun. The Great War became World War I, a grim prefix acknowledging the failure. The trenches of Flanders were overgrown, but the ideological trenches dug deep in the 1920s and 30s, nationalism, totalitarianism, the devaluation of human life, were now the front lines. The sacrifice of 10 million had not purchased lasting peace, only a 20-year armistice. The cycle of violence, born in Sarajevo and nurtured in Versailles, completed its dreadful turn. The breath of the past. We inhabit the landscape they bled to create, breathe the air of their fractured peace. The borders drawn in Paris still ignite conflict. The technologies they pioneered shape our world and our wars. The disillusionment they seeded informs our cynicism. The memorials stand, but do we truly hear the whispers from the stones? The past isn't a closed book, it's a living current beneath our feet. The mud of Passchendaele, the gas of Ypres, the shattered hope of Versailles, they are not relics. They are warnings etched in suffering that the fragile constructs of civilization and peace demand constant, vigilant care, lest the shadows deepen once more. The breath of 1914 still stirs the air. The flickering candle, the last veterans, bent with the weight of a century, became living monuments. Their hands, once steady on rifles, now trembled holding teacups. Their eyes, dimmed by age, still held the sharp glint of Flanders mud and Verdun snow. We gathered around them, hungry for stories, but the words often choked in throats lined with phosgene scars and unspoken terrors. When the final Tommy, the last Poalu, the ultimate front soldat, slipped away, an irreplaceable light guttered out. The direct line to the scream of shells and the stench of gangrene was severed. We were left with archives, grainy film, and the chilling silence after the last post fades. Echoes in new battlefields. The names change, Kabul, Kiev, Gaza, but the ghosts of 1914 walk beside the drones and the missiles, the same poison blooms. Blind nationalism masquerading as patriotism, the dehumanizing rhetoric that turns them into targets, not people, the brittle alliances cracking under pressure. The terrible arithmetic where ground gained is measured in young lives lost. The lessons inscribed in 10 million graves. The futility of attrition. The danger of unchecked escalation. The fragility of peace seem written in sand, washed away by each new tide of anger and fear. Sarajevo's street corner finds grim reflections in every fresh flashpoint. He stone whispers. The memorials endure. The Menin Gate still echoes with the nightly bugle. The Ossuaria Douaumont holds the bones of the unidentifiable. The poppies still bloom on Flanders fields. They are not just stone and flower, they are questions carved in granite. What did you learn? What will you choose? They ask us to see the faces behind the statistics, the individual dreams crushed beneath the weight of empires and ideologies. They demand we recognize the terrifying cost of failure, failure of diplomacy, failure of imagination, failure of basic human empathy. They stand as mirrors, reflecting not just the past, but our present choices. The choice in the breath. The world did hold its breath in 1914, and it gasped, shattered for 4 long years. The past breathes still, not as a distant sigh, but as a cold wind at our backs carrying the scent of cordite and mud and broken promises. The shadow hasn't lifted. We've merely learned to live within its chill. The end of this story isn't written. It rests in the space between heartbeats, in the quiet moments before the next wrong turn, the next ultimatum, the next mobilization order. It rests with us. Will we hear the whispers from the stones? Will we learn, truly learn, from the long, cold shadow? Or will we simply step, eyes wide open, into the next terrible silence after the guns begin?
Though born in the unimaginable darkness of trenches and gas, the legacy of 1914-1918 is not despair, but humanity's defiant light. From that crucible of suffering emerged profound resilience. Nurses healing across enemy lines, soldiers sharing truces in frozen mud, poets turning agony into art, and nations, once locked in slaughter, forging reconciliation from ruin. This war shattered empires but accelerated justice, expanding suffrage, advancing medicine, and planting seeds of global cooperation. Today, poppies bloom over old battlefields, not as symbols of death, but of life's unbreakable persistence. Europe stands united where once it bled, and every act of peace we choose, every bridge built, every prejudice disarmed, every voice raised for understanding, honors the millions who gave their tomorrows. Their sacrifice whispers across the century, protect this fragile world, tend the hard-won dawn, and carry forward the unquenchable hope that even from history's deepest shadow, we can build a brighter, kinder day. Sleep peacefully, friends, and wake inspired to tend the light they believed in.